What if you had your own personal assistant? Would it be a dream to offload as many tasks as you'd like for both work and personal life inside and outside of teaching? Well, while I can't give you that right here on the podcast, what I can help you with are some ideas to get your creative juices flowing of how you can delegate more this school year, utilizing the resources you already have. Welcome to Educate and Rejuvenate, the podcast, episode 144. Let's go. Welcome to Educate and Rejuvenate, the podcast to help you revitalize your teaching, renew your spirit, and reignite your passion for life. I'm your host, Kelsey Sorensen, a former teacher, current homeschool mom, published author, and certified life coach. Whether you are a teacher in a traditional classroom, homeschool from your kitchen table, or anywhere in between, I am on a mission to help you not only survive as an educator, but thrive. Get ready to uplevel your skills with incredible insights from guest experts and discover the missing piece, rejuvenating yourself. Are you ready to both educate and rejuvenate? Let's go. How's back to school going for you, my friend? I hope it is going so well. For me, we're easing into our homeschool year right now. So you may or may not know this, but I am a homeschool parent. I have been since 2019, taught third grade and subbed K through 6 before that. So it's been a fun education journey, but I'm homeschooling my fifth grader. Now going into fifth grade, my son, Parker, my third grade daughter, Brielle, and my preschooler, or pre-K really, Peter. And so we're kind of easing back in. We did our first week of computer school this week as I'm recording, and then we'll be starting, we call it computer school and book school. It's just a simple way to phrase it for the kids, but they have their online program they do, which is like a full curriculum. And then I do lots of book school things with them with Educate and Rejuvenate resources, and then just exploring and learning and having so much fun together and just making sure we hit all the bases of things we need to do, but also explore their own interests and everything. It's so much fun. Again, that's why I love supporting both homeschoolers and teachers here on the podcast, because I've been both. So whatever you're doing, or even if you're an admin or a paraprofessional or any kind of teacher, online teacher, whatever, college professor, wherever you are, I hope that back to school is going well for you. And again, I will continue sharing some of the fun that we have this school year in my stories on Instagram. So make sure you're following there. But today I'm here on the podcast to share a little bit about how we can delegate more this coming school year. And this is a piece of the urgency matrix that we talked about on the podcast last week. So if you missed it, you don't have to stop this one and go back to that one, but I'd really recommend circling back to that episode because this is one piece of the urgency matrix that we talked about last week, and I felt like it deserved its own episode because I feel like what comes up a lot with the urgency matrix is when you talk about delegate, people are like, oh, well, that's a nice idea, but like, I can't delegate. I don't have somebody to just delegate stuff to at my job, or, I don't have a lot of money to use to hire someone to come in and be my assistant or whatever. Most of us aren't doing that, right? I mean, in my business, I hire people to be on my team, but that's because, again, it's like different. And that's why in the business industry, people, when they talk about delegate, they're usually talking about hiring. But when you're talking to teachers or homeschool parents, just, doing your everyday to-day stuff, you're not hiring people, right? Maybe you have people at your school who you may or may not have an assistant or whatever, but again, there's just so much. So today we're talking about how you can delegate. So one of my favorite things to do as a coach is just ask questions that people don't usually ask. So that's what we're going to start with. So what is delegation? I feel like a lot of us would just be like, oh, it's telling someone else to do something, right? But I really want to know, what does it mean to you to delegate something when you think about that? Because I feel like all of us might use different words to describe it. And what I found really interesting is I actually Googled, and I do this every so often, like I did it back on a time when we were talking about selfish, and then that made it into my book as well, my upcoming book. But today I Googled to prep for this episode the word delegate, and 2 words came up. And the first would actually be pronounced differently. Delegate came up. I'm like, oh, well, this is timely. It says a person sent or authorized to represent others, in particular an elected representative sent to a conference. So Again, that's kind of interesting because I never personally connected like, oh yeah, that's us delegating. It's not like when we vote, we're voting for these delegates. We're delegating someone else technically to put in that vote. Now, I'm not getting into politics on this episode, but that's kind of what it is. Like you're almost entrusting someone else to do something on your behalf when you're delegating. That's what I do with my team with Educate and Rejuvenate. And, that's what a lot of us will do with different things when we delegate. But also, I do kind of want to expand on that definition a little bit. Here's another definition, the second one that came up on Google. It says to entrust a task or responsibility to another person, typically one who is less senior than oneself. Now, I didn't totally love that second part, to be honest. I mean, and I get what they're saying. I get that in a job, there would be people who it's like, oh, this is your direct report or whatever. But I also like to see delegation as just people playing to their strengths, right? Like, this is my strength. This is your strength. How can we support each other? How can we delegate to make this easier? So I really want us to that's why I wanted to ask the question to you. What do you think it means? And maybe we'll even have a discussion about this, like in my Instagram stories, maybe, or in an Instagram post, or in the Educate and Rejuvenate collective. Well, it's Educated and Rejuvenated collective. I'm getting used to that Facebook group, our free Facebook group. Maybe we should have a conversation about what does it mean to you to delegate? But I mean, what doesn't it mean? To me, it definitely doesn't mean guilting someone into doing something for you, like just kind of throwing your stuff on someone else and adding more problems to their plate. To me, that's definitely not what it's about. Is it just asking someone else to do it for you? What does it mean to delegate something? So that's what came up on Google. But to me, what I did like from that is, again, it's kind of you having, when you're delegating, something else is representing you and doing that task for you. You're also trusting someone or something. We're going to talk about it's not always like a person you're telling to do something per se. You're trusting like an established resource, or you're trusting technology, or different ways we can delegate. So I really want to think expansively about what does it mean to delegate. And to me, if I were to just say a simple definition, to delegate is to offload something off my plate to something or someone else. Like I'm offloading it and something else is going to get it done rather than me, myself doing it. So that would be my kind of broad definition of it. I would love to hear what you have to say about that too. I think delegation has gotten more advanced because we now have things like AI, we have delivery apps, we have like teachers pay teachers for resources, or the Educate and Rejuvenate Club. And again, so you may not be able to hire your own personal or professional assistant, but I'm hoping to get some ideas flowing for you. And I want you to realize ways you're already delegating. You might have seen this time, be like, oh, I can't delegate. But do you ever purchase a resource on TPT or download a freebie? That's delegating, because you could have planned or done that yourself, but you're delegating to that resource. You're like, I'm finding something else that's doing the work. Thank you. Now I'm going to take it from here. Also, have you ever like gone through a drive-thru to pick up food on your way home from work? You're already delegating. Instead of you making that food, you delegated to the people at Taco Bell. I say that because that's my kid's favorite, to make dinner for you. And that right there is delegating. So I want you to realize ways, kind of think, I'm already delegating. Now, what are some more ways that I can delegate? And hopefully that can help get some ideas flowing and get you believing that, yes, it's possible for me to delegate. And yes, it's possible for me to do it a little bit more this school year, to give myself some more brain space, some more creativity, some more flow in my life, some more time to maybe read the Educate and Rejuvenate book that's coming out, or join us on an Educate and Rejuvenate coaching call, or listen to this podcast, right? To expand your mind and help you to fully lean in and rejuvenate. So that's one reason why delegation can be so powerful and so important. So let's talk about what we need to know to delegate first. So first, who and what you have available, right? For example, I'm going to talk about kind of some who's you might have. And this is another thing that when I talk about who's, the reason that came up is there's this book by Benjamin Sullivan and Dan Hardy. It's called Who, Not How. So sometimes it's really a business concept, but I feel like it can also be applicable to just life as well. So it's who, not how. It's like, I don't need to figure out how absolutely everything is going to get done. I need to figure out who's going to figure that out. Now, sometimes that person is me. Sometimes it might be like, oh, there are certain things my students are actually responsible for doing, or my own children. Or there are certain things that, oh, maybe this other person on my team, she's way better at figuring out math than me. I'm way better at language arts. So we're going to kind of plan some things and share with each other. So that's the who. I didn't have to figure out the how, right? So it's just kind of a way to think about it, like who, not how. Or you can even be what, not how, because if we're talking about AI or a teaching resource, right? So it's another interesting piece to think about delegation. And again, that wasn't even in my notes. I love how in the episodes today I've gone way off script on both of them. So sometimes things just come up and I want to share them, right? Okay, so again, who you have available, who or what. So your teacher team, right? That's a big one. So how can you work together and collaborate? Can you do rotations with another teacher or swap planning, right? Can you even, and again, you might not be able to just do this, but could you departmentalize? Could you rotate and be, you teach this subject, I'll teach that one for some things. Like, I did that some as teaching. And as a kid, I loved that. I loved when my teachers did that. Students love it. So that's just one way you could think of maybe, could I see if there's something we could do this year? Or maybe, again, it's just switching planning, like I mentioned. Also, and again, these first ones are if you're teaching in a traditional school setting, if you're teaching online, or if you're homeschooling. Hang tight, I'm getting to you. There's a lot that's just general, or a couple homeschool things too. For example, and if you're homeschooling, it could be co-op, right? So you don't have to do all the homeschool planning. And we're going to talk about resources and curriculum and all that as well. So the next one, paraprofessionals, right? If you're teaching in a school, you might have paras who are ready and willing and waiting to help you, right? With data collection or IEP goal practice or small groups. They might be just waiting for you to ask, right? And so that's all it takes. Also, depending on the demographic of the school you teach at, you might have parents as a great resource. Sometimes they can be an amazing resource. Then you might just need to send a letter home or a message on whatever it is you're using for parental communication. You might be able to get some support and help there. And then again, even students, depending on their grade, if you're teaching like upper elementary or middle school or high school, you could have them grade each other's papers rather than you doing all the grading. You could have classroom jobs. Those can be so helpful. And if you're in the Educate and Rejuvenate Club, we have a whole resource that's going to help you out with that too. Also, your spouse and partner. You can also, it's always like the beginning of a school year is a great time if you have a spouse or partner to kind of regroup and be like, okay, how are things going? Check up with each other and be like, okay, I've been doing this, you've been doing that. Are there things we need to swap off? How is it going? Do you need more support? Here's how I need more support. And that can be a way to, again, it's not delegate. This is one where I'm like, that's where I don't always like that who's less senior than yourself, like your teacher team, or even I don't like to see someone as less than myself, even like paraprofessionals, they're just in a different role, right? A different strength. So we play to those different strengths and we work together. So with your spouse or partner, you might figure out like, maybe it might work for us to change things up this year. So that's another thing to think of. Your own children, right? And again, it can take some more time, just like it does for your students. It can take some more time up front to like have them learn how to do different chores or different things. And so it might not happen right during August when you're getting back to school, but something to think about this school year is what new systems can you create at home that make it easy for them to maybe start doing their own laundry. That's something we've been working on. Or for them to make sure that they clean up after dinner, things like that, making sure that you don't have to do it all yourself. Because I found myself be like, it's just easier for me to do it or whatever. But again, delegating to the kids is teaching them life skills as well that they will learn and grow. And then eventually, once they've gotten it, it'll be a nice delegation tool for us as well. And then there's also neighbors and friends who you can see maybe there are things you can trade that aren't a big deal to you and something's not a big deal to them, but they both like really help each other. So those are some ideas of ways of people, of whos you can go to. And again, anytime you're delegating or working with a person to offload tasks, and maybe you're taking some for them too, clarity is the key. And also respect and checking in. Like I mentioned, delegating is not about just shoving things off your plate onto someone else and giving them all your problems. That's not what it's about. So clarity and respect. And another thing is when you're delegating, we can't micromanage, right? So it was kind of like a story I told in my book when there was a time where I was actually delegating some of our homeschool to my husband, right? I had been doing all of it at one point, and then we got to where we were trading off a bit more. He was just doing little things. Then it got to a point where I actually needed him to do more of it while I was like really in the heat of writing my book and the event and a lot of this. And I found myself micromanaging. I found myself noticing like, wait, he's not doing this right. Wait, he's not doing that right. There was a time, and you'll hear more about it in my book, but where I really didn't show up well for him. And it was like, I was kind of blaming him and shaming him for not doing things my way. And I realized that I caught myself because that's what we have to do, right? We're all human. I observed myself, right? And then I was like, this is what's going on. I'm thinking he needs to do it my way. I'm thinking, and I'm worrying that the kids aren't getting what they need. And I just had to touch in and be like, okay, I still care about the kids getting what they need, but let's check in. Is him not doing it my way bad? And it wasn't bad, right? So Again, we want to delegate. When we do that, we're trusting someone else to do it. And if there are important key parts that we need done a certain way, that's where clarity is important, because I hadn't been clear about that. And so we don't want to micromanage. We don't want to get into every exact way somebody needs to do something. And this is something I've learned as a boss with people on my team as well. You don't want to micromanage, especially because if you're micromanaging, then it really isn't saving you that much time or that much energy. It's just giving you yet another thing to do to manage that person. And then you're ending up still kind of in that task too. So it's really important that you don't micromanage, that you trust. Again, that's part of that. One of those definitions on Google was to trust when you delegate, and make sure that you are doing that, handing that off, the outcome, right? It's more about an outcome you're delegating, not a task. You're delegating that thing being done. So another way to delegate is not necessarily through people. And I mean, obviously they're by people at some point, but you might not even work directly with them. An example of this that a lot of you have probably done is buying a resource on TPT, right? That person has done the planning and the prepping for you. They've written the lesson plan and you already have it. And we have this again in all of our resources in the Educate and Rejuvenate Club too, where all these resources are just done for you, even differentiated to all these different levels, and you could just be like, oh, thank you, that's done, amazing, that's delegated. I could have spent the time on that, but instead I'm going to spend just a little bit of money and get this, and now that is delegated and taken care of. Another example of something done for you might be like a meal planning service. Like you might, like I know people like things like HelloFresh or whatever, where it's really like you might still do some of the prep, but the thinking part is done. I feel like a lot of it is the brain space of like, oh, now I need to figure out what we're going to do for dinner. And that can be such a big thing, and having everything already there and ready for you. And that's kind of the same thing I found recently. Like I mentioned last week, I started a new workout routine. I started going to, and I've kept the yoga that I mentioned before, but I've now added on, I'm going to it's a group personal training place. And it's great because now I'm getting the strength training too. And so hopefully by next Educate and Rejuvenate, I'm going to be like super strong, right? That's the plan. And by next Educate and Rejuvenate, I mean the event. I need to get more clear about when I say, now that's the whole brand, right? But for 2 years, Educate and Rejuvenate was just the event. So by our next summer conference, super excited to see where all this goes, because I'm planning on the long term with this, and sharing it on the podcast is part of that, right? When I share it, kind of gives me some more accountability. But again, it took out all the brain space of figuring out like, oh, like, well, what do I need to do? Because I have all these dumbbells at home, but it's like thinking about what do I need to do with them? How do I want to do it? When do I want to do what? And instead now I just know, okay, I just need to show up and they're going to have it all figured out for me. So that again, they can't do the working out for me, but they can take the brain space. And I really think a big part with delegation is where can I delegate the brain space, because it's not always just the doing, but it's how can I free up that space in my mind to make this thing that I still need to do easier. Another kind of category I'm thinking of is like household delegation. So like I mentioned this one a lot, but grocery delivery and pickup is so helpful for this. Like just getting those groceries. I love delivery, but also pickup is great too. So you can just have it come to you and you don't have to think about it, and you don't have as many impulse buys. I find I don't really impulse buy stuff as much online as I do in the store. So it actually saves money too. Again, drive-through and takeout, that's also delegation that sometimes really comes in handy, right? And I realize some of these things I've kind of already worked into the episode, but just again, reminding systems in the house with your kids for them to follow, so that over time, a lot of the household stuff is delegated as you build those systems, and systems that work to put into place. And we might need to do a whole episode on like systems in your classroom and at home. That might be a good 2-part series. And maybe I could even bring in some guests for those. That could be fun. Let me know on Instagram or in the group if you'd like to hear those. Another one that I don't do all the time, but I do from time to time, is actually hiring a house cleaner. It's like $200, but sometimes it is so worth it. And again, this is only if you have the funds and you're able to do it, but there are times where just the house has become chaotic and, you know, it can feel so much more peaceful at times. And again, we can always do mind management around it, but sometimes we just want to free that brain space, right? So if you can, like maybe back to school is a good time when you're like, I'm going to hire a house cleaner. Like it's not going to be an ongoing thing, but I'm going to get one time to get my house cleaned up so I can focus more on all the stuff I need to do for back to school. So that's always something you can have in your back pocket. Like right now, I need this. Another one is utilizing tech and AI. And AI is so powerful. And honestly, I need to dive into it even more. But even what I do use it for, sometimes it helps me a little bit. Like it helped me a little bit with this podcast outline. It helped me with some brainstorming examples for my book. I mean, I wrote my book, but I didn't have AI write my book. But sometimes brainstorming, right? Ideas, or like, oh, this sentence feels weird. Can you help me rephrase it or whatever? But anyway, AI can be like such a great tool. And I know I haven't even done enough justice with it myself yet, but it can help so much with lesson ideas, organization, so much more. You can use technology or AI to automate newsletters and reminders to parents, researching, scheduling, just so much. And on the podcast, right here on Educate and Rejuvenate the podcast, I recommend checking out episode 117 called Is ChatGPT the Future of Teacher Burnout Prevention? That is with Brittany Blackwell. She's really the first person I met in the teacher space who's really a go-to for AI. She's so good at that. And she also did, if you are a member of the Educate and Rejuvenate Club, if you go to the replays from last winter 2023 Educate and Rejuvenate conference, she did a full hour-long session all about AI and some of the tools she uses for lesson planning and delegating in that area. And honestly, it just blew my mind. I didn't know all these things were possible. So if you're a member of the club, the Educate and Rejuvenate Club, that is our signature membership. If you want to learn more about it, go to educateandrejuvenate.com/club. Be sure to check that out. Another great resource for that, my publisher Teacher Goals, one of their first books was called The AI Classroom. And it is another amazing book that breaks down. Honestly, it's like a thick, like when I got it in the mail, when I got my copy, I was like, oh wow, this is not like a little book. This is like a big guidebook for all the different things you can do. It's hefty with AI. There's so much you can do. And the way it's outlined is like really digestible and really easy to use. I love that book. I highly recommend it. I even wonder if and for those of you who are in the Educate and Rejuvenate Club, I know a lot of you listen to this. So I'm thinking about swapping with our book club, doing like a Rejuvenate book and then an Educate book. Our next book club, we just wrapped up our book club with Christina Kuzmich, and we're going to start our book club with my book here soon, which with that one, I think it's going to be open to even those not in the club. We'll just figure out some extra perks for club members because anybody who buys the book, I want the book club for my book. But then we're going to keep rotating maybe an Educate book and then a Rejuvenate book because we're Educate and Rejuvenate, right? We do both. We have the resources and we also have coaching and these events that bring all of it together. It's so great. Okay, well, so we talked about so many different ideas for delegating today. We talked about, first, we really got clear on what delegating is. Like, what does delegating mean to you? I shared that really to me, delegation means to like offload a task to someone or something. And really, it's actually optimizing an outcome, right? Like something being complete and done to someone or something. So it's off your plate and clearing up your brain space and your to-do list. That's kind of how I would explain it. We've talked about how all the people who might be in your life who can help, your teacher team, paras, parents, students, your own kids, neighbors, friends. We talked about how clarity is key and it's about respect and checking in with people. It's not about taking all your problems and putting it on someone else. And we don't want to micromanage when we delegate too, right? We also talked about done for you things such as like utilizing TPT resources, meal plans, a workout trainer or an app, household delegation through grocery, delivery or pickup, drive-through, takeout, systems in the house to get things done, and maybe every once in a while splurging for a house cleaner if it's in your budget, and then utilizing tech and AI. There's so much possibility with that, and that should be its own series of like multiple episodes, of course, but again, you can check out that one, episode 117 with Brittany Blackwell for more on AI and delegating with that. Now, hopefully overall, the point of this episode wasn't for me to tell you exactly what you need to do. It was to help you get ideas flowing with how you can delegate more this school year. And it's going to look different for everyone, right? But believing it's possible, believing that you already are delegating in some ways, but you can expand it into delegating in other ways to lighten your load and free up your brain space and rejuvenate yourself even more this school year. How would you do it? So if you were to start delegating, here's how we'll close up today. Close up the content portion of this today. If you were to just start delegating one thing today, what would it be? How would you do it? Now that's your homework assignment from me. Get going on that thing that came to your mind. Thank you so much for listening today. I have so many amazing podcasts coming up for you. I have a really fun interview that I'm hoping to get lined up for next week. But if not, it'll be a really fun solo episode with me leading up to the book launch. Probably like a sneak peek into my book with some content you'll want to hear. So either way, you won't want to miss it. So make sure you're subscribed here on Apple or Spotify or Amazon or Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. Or we're also on YouTube if you want the video version. We get like 5 people watching over there. And we get like, hundreds over on other platforms, but we do have YouTube available as an option as well. You can also follow on Instagram. I am working on creating more meaningful, bite-sized content for you over there. Instagram, again, for a while, it wasn't really a huge priority for me. So it was just like whatever was getting out. But over the next few months, we're really working on trying to make Instagram a place that you can really count on some really good, useful, bite-sized content coming out. In reels, stories, posts. Definitely make sure you check out the stories too, because that's going to be where even more behind the scenes is going on. So when you see my story pop up, click on it, check it out. And if you see one of our posts, engage with it or share them with friends, it means a lot, and it helps a small business owner, even just when you like or when you comment or when you share with a friend. I really want this to reach as many educators as possible, because I believe that all of us as teachers should be able to educate and rejuvenate as a lifestyle. And that "and" is so important, because we're all teaching, right? But we're not all rejuvenating ourselves. That's why so many teachers are burned out. So I really believe this work and this podcast needs to get out there more to more teachers. So any way you can do that by sharing this episode, or again, going on Instagram, liking and commenting and saving and sharing. All of those help the algorithm to share with more people. And obviously sharing with your friends does too. Any of that you could do, I would totally appreciate it. And again, I will see you, or probably not see you unless you're watching on YouTube, but I will chat with you here on the podcast next week. Thank you for joining me on Educate and Rejuvenate, the podcast today. If you love what you heard in this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're hungry for even more, be sure to check out the book that I wrote. It's called Educate and Rejuvenate, a 3-step guide to revitalize your teaching, renew your spirit, and reignite your passion for life. It takes everything you learn here on the podcast and that I teach our members inside the Educate and Rejuvenate Club into a guidebook you can refer to again and again. One of our early readers said it was like clarity for her brain. Plus, it's not only a book. With your purchase, you'll get a full PDF guide with exercises and links to videos and more, so that you can not only consume, but apply everything that you learn. If you're ready to make Educate and Rejuvenate not just a podcast you passively listen to, but a lifestyle that you put into action, it's time to grab your copy on Amazon today. Or head to educateandrejuvenate.com/book to read the first chapter and the introduction today.